Derelicts of Uranus by J. Harvey Haggard, originally published in Comet, May 1941. Narrated by Tom Trisson. 1. Lonny Higgins, once of the earthly planet, stretched out in the conning tower of his mud-submarine, an aquatic monstrosity of globular reinforced steel that was at home either above or below the surface of the squirming mud seas of Uranus, and sighed lazily. "Blast it," he moaned sleepily and almost regretfully. "There's something about this planet that makes you have spring fever the year round, and it gets worse and worse. Lonny Higgins, you're a lazy, no-good fool, and you'll never get around to the things you used to dream about." The circular hatch was open over his head, showing a patch of black swirling mists through which dark midges manoeuvred in tiny swarms. Just as he was dozing comfortably, forgetful of the humming insects on the outside and the occasional flopping sounds made by things that squirmed in the muddy ocean, something dropped from the mist, falling plunk on his forehead. He jerked sidewise just as another pellet of bald mud struck him on the end of his nose. He glimpsed a tiny visage, half insect and quasi-human, peering over the hatch rim for an instant. "Baron Munchie!" exclaimed Lonny irritably, recognizing this curious specimen of Uranusian life. "Cut that out, or I'll wring your little neck. I haven't got time for any of your monkey shines." A winged thing soared down from the mists, landing on the chair beside his couch, and Baron Munchie, like a dragonfly come to mysterious human-like life, folded his transparent wings back like a cloak and paced back and forth. "Me mad! Me plent mad!" rasped Baron Munchie, who produced his tones by a vibration of his wings. "Ah, beat it!" snorted Lonny, turning his head away. The small being had brought with him the dank, stagnant aroma of the outer swamps, and that reminded him of untended netlines hanging in the mud. He was bored with Baron Munchie and his endless lying and conniving. When he had first come to Uranus, 2 years before, the little rascal had showed up on the landing deck, more dead than alive from a terrific beating at the hands of several of his fellows. Baron Munchie was a born fighter. He survived under the ministrations of the lonely terrestrial, and had become attached to the mud-submarine. But he dearly loved to stir up trouble, and nothing pleased the little demon more than to shout insults at mud-monkeys until they fought among themselves. "Go away! I'm tired of listening to your silly chatter." "Me mad as heck!" cried Baron Munchie, sitting down on the edge of the chair like a tiny mannequin, and doubling his tiny fists beneath his chitinous chin. "That man says the boss no good. He say the boss one big blonde devil. He say—" "Shut up," protested Lonny. "Rayburn's all right. He's just a mudfisher like me, and has got to get along. It's natural that he doesn't like a rival, and I'm not a bit riled by your chatter." He was presently snoring, and Baron Munchie looked across the space through squinting, calculating eyes. For a moment the mischievous glitter in his faceted eyes became dulled, and then he soared across the bed and sat astride Lonny's neck, using the Adam's apple for a saddle. Lonny roused with a start and gulped. The small insect-like visage was thrust grimly down to the end of his nose, and a tiny finger was raised emphatically. "He say he knock the holy feather from you, boss," he chirped grimly. "He say you fish for pearls in mud that belong him. He say that girl make him one fine cook, and—" "Huh?" demanded Lonny Higgins. "What girl?" "Oh, he probably means Lana. Blast it, Munchie, can't you let a guy sleep? If she wants to fall for a flat tire like Rayburn, it's no business of mine." Grunting reluctantly, Lonny got up and stretched, cursing in a fervent undertone, at which Baron Munchie looked hopeful. "Good Lord, Munchie," he growled. "Why I ever put up with you and your stirring up trouble is more than I know." Yet he knew that the little creature's chatter had helped to break the deadly monotony of the long winter hours in which he had managed to teach pidgin English to the Uranusian. He climbed up the ladder, through the hatch, just as a rocking movement was apparent in the hull of the mud-submarine. Down past the oblong landing, he saw great circular movements in the mud where his nets had been a few moments before. Tiny midges were falling into the mud and being drawn into the gyrating vortices. Now thoroughly awake, he leaped down and across the landing. In a few seconds he stood cursing at the broken strands of the anchor lines where his nets had been ripped away. "Damn you, whirl-rays!" he cursed, shaking his fist in the direction of the whirlpools that surged in and out like living things, which of course they were, under their coating of slimy mud. The whirl-rays had a way of forcing a stream of mud in a downward spout and creating a resultant whirlpool which sucked everything into its voracious clutches. "That's my 10th set of nets you've got that way." Baron Munchie fluttered out from below and landed on the railing, preening his wings. There was an "I told you so" expression on his insectivorian countenance. Then he saw the angry expression on the terrestrial's face and heard the flow of vitriolic words. He hopped up and down with impish ecstasy. "My goodness, boss," he chirruped, "you heap mad. Maybe something goin' happen now, huh? Maybe you whip tar out of Rayburn, huh?" Lonny swatted at Baron Munchie with his open palm, but the blow never landed. Out of the mists, coming suddenly from somewhere across the squirming quagmire, came the sounds of a human being crying in desperation. "Help! Help!" sounded the voice, and the thing that so startled Lonny Higgins was that the words were unmistakably feminine. "Good Lord!" he exploded. "Do you suppose Rayburn really has got Lana in his mud-submarine? Damn it, Baron Munchie, why didn't you say so before you spoke?" 2. Contrary to the general belief earlier than 2070, when the explorer, Ramundsen, first dipped down through the screening vapours of Uranus, the temperature never approached the freezing point and lurked instead nearer to the boiling mark of water. The boiling point on Uranus varied greatly, however, due to the unbelievable fluctuations of the atmospheric pressure. Lonny made poor time, slogging along on the mud shoes fashioned with tough vines over a framework of metal. There was a limit to the speed you could make on such contraptions. Baron Munchie, bordering on a nervous frenzy at the promise of activity, had darted ahead, his filmy wings dissolving quickly in the swirling mist. He had a good general idea as to the whereabouts of Rayburn's mud-submarine. Likewise, he had a fairly good estimate of the mudfish's capabilities, and did not think that Lana Hilton would suffer much if Rayburn had not gone completely wacky. At times the going was pretty good, where the mud was entwined with thick layers of lightning kelp, so called because tiny sparkles of static electricity darted from it at each step of his clogged mud shoes. Mud, mud, mud. All Uranus was one vast ball of squirming mud. 32,000 miles through of squashy mud. Stuff that would run through his fingers and through the webs of his shoes, and which would suck greedily at his body if he so much as lost his footing. Mud that would never solidify due to the varying turmoil of barometric pressure. Mud that could never dry completely due to the quasi-soluble consistency of Uranusian silt. 2 years he'd been here now, fishing for the precious mollusks whose pearls might win him the security and prosperity he had never been able to wrest from the overpopulated earth. 2 years it had been, or 9 days, as time was reckoned on Uranus. 9 times he had gone around the muddy world, keeping up with daylight, such as it was, and now, blast it, the world was getting him, absorbing him mentally as well as physically, or so it seemed. Only 4 days before, Uranus, a bit less than a year, the feminine aridity of the planet had been shattered by the coming of that headstrong, unreasoning female, Lana Hilton. Prior to that, there had been company of a sort on Uranus. Link Rayburn's mud-submarine had often drifted near enough for an occasional chat. But Lana's coming had made a crowd on Uranus, if 3 can be called a crowd, and Lonny was beginning to wish for the unbroken isolation of other planets with no form of life whatsoever. There was only one method of obtaining Uranusian pearls. That method was relatively simple. You had to invest every cent of your savings or heritage, as he had done 2 years before, and you had to pay towing charges to some space schooner that was coming near Uranus. Seafood came cheaply on Uranus, but clothing was a different problem, and you had to have a goodly stock of that. Then, when you did find enough pearls to warrant the voyage home, you had to send out an SOS to a nearby space vessel, and the captain, fearing the loss of his command if he disobeyed interplanetary law, would have to come several million miles extra to pick you up, sans submarine, of course, which by that time would be a rusted chunk of worthless metal anyway. He was wet to the skin when he heard voices through the mist. To his nose came the suffocating downdraft of the fishing vessel, mingled with a faint aroma of ammonia. "Sock him! Smack him down!" he heard Baron Munchie shouting at the top of his tiny voice. "Plasterer another! Lead with right, dadblimey!" Fearing the worst, Lonny tried to hurry, with the result that he became tangled in his mud shoes and had to flounder the rest of the way. On the landing, he shook off as much of the mud as was possible, kicked off his mud shoes, and staggered toward the shaft of light pouring up from the hatchway. In the centre of the control room, Baron Munchie was stalking back and forth, yelling like a referee. Link Rayburn's angular body was sprawled back disgustedly on a low bench, while Lana Hilton was flopped down in a chair at a table, her dejected face propped up by both hands. "Why don't you wallop and kiss her?" demanded Baron Munchie, hopping up to the table beside her and trying to lift an arm. "Smash him over place, Lana!" "Damn that mosquito!" snapped Link Rayburn wearily. "Can't you swat him? Why doesn't that fool Lonny keep him home where he belongs?" "What's the big idea?" demanded Lonny, looking from one to the other and clawing miserably at his mud coating. He gazed accusingly at the girl in tattered metaline slacks and faded blouse of vitricine. "So you finally got here," she commented casually. "I thought that would bring you. He's chivalrous, isn't he, Link?" "Look here, Rayburn," snorted Lonny, doubling a grimy fist and turning to the flint-featured man. "Are you trying to play some sort of a game?" "Ask Lana," said Rayburn, puffing at a smoking stem of mud-kelp. "She was the one that screamed." "Maybe it's me that's nuts," exploded Lonny indignantly. "Right," chorused the twain boredly. "Sock him, boss," wailed Baron Munchie, shadowboxing on the border of the table. "Don't let him get away with that. Splatter him." "Oh, sit down," growled Link Rayburn, plucking thoughtfully at the delicate outline of a tiny moustache. "Lana yelled all right. That was her way of calling the meeting to order. The 3 of us constitute the majority on Uranus, and in case you're getting ideas, her virtue's safe. She's got quite a problem on her hands. Tell him, Lana." "You seem to be doing all right," said the girl, crossing her legs nonchalantly. "Well, to put it shortly, her mud-submarine, which was a second-hand job, finally caved in from oxidization. So she came around here and demanded that I put her up with room and board for half of her take." "Look here," demanded Lana Hilton. taking a chamois bag from her bosom, which when opened displayed a goodly fortune of pink Uranosian pearls. "My shack begins to crumble. Any minute it'll be heading down to the muddy locker, and that dirty robber wants them all for my keep. Everything I got, I tell you." "Nuts! The gal's buggy," said Link Rayburn coldly. "She's safe enough, I tell you, and if she weren't there's not a blasted thing you could do about it. This planet has got her brain whirling. I told her she'd better sound out an SOS and take a powder for Earth." "What do you expect from me?" exploded Lonny. "I told you I would have nothing to do with that Nova skirt from the first when she tried to play us one against the other." "I give up!" cried Lana Hilton, spreading empty hands in a gesture of defeat. "Once I had the lead role in a chorus, and I gave all that up for this. I thought I could handle men with kid gloves, but when it comes to you, Lonny, I'll say you've cast iron defence." "Rayburn can have you," snorted Lonny, "for all I care." Spat! Her open hand had snapped out and landed on his cheek. "Swatter, boss!" pleaded Baron Munchie delightedly. "Whee! Does that dame have a punch?" "Maybe I exaggerated a trifle," stammered Lonny, taken aback by the startling reaction. "That's better," returned Lana Hilton, beginning to pace the control room worriedly. Lonny Higgins wiped a gob of mud thoughtfully from his chin and grinned when he saw that her hand was grimy. "Oh, hell," he said grudgingly. "I'll have to get back before this mud cakes up on me." "So long," said Link Rayburn, without looking around. "Come on, Munchie," called Lonny. "No fireworks." "No fireworks?" repeated Baron Munchie dolefully. "None at all. Lana, I'm still a white man, though it's much against my will. If worse comes to the worst, you can have an extra room in my mud-swimming hovel, and you can keep your handful of marbles." The girl whirled around, wide-eyed with surprise. A sunburst of hope and relief spread slowly over her features. "So you are human after all," she gasped. "I'll just take you up on that before you change your mind, but in order not to have a misunderstanding, I'll let it be known that I'm going to pay half my pearls, whether you like it or not. Don't stand there grinning like an ape. You act as though I ought to throw in a kiss for good measure." "Go ahead," snorted Link Rayburn smirkingly. "Right on that muddy kisser." Climbing back into the upper mists, Lonny almost regretted his decision. She had donned a slicker suit and a pair of mud shoes and was ready to go. The mist swirlers were tumbling about as though alive, and Lonny had never felt so uncomfortable in his whole life. 3. He had to admit that Lana Hilton was adept on her mud shoes, but she was short of wind and soon began to lag. I would get stuck with a woman, he thought bitterly, not realize that he spoke out loud. She didn't know what she was talking about, he decided, but for the sake of not starting an argument he kept that to himself. In the meanwhile he slowed his pace to match her own and said nothing. Tiny sparks of miniature lightning shot up from matted mud kelp and rippled along the supple curvature of her body. She was just good-looking enough to be a constant cause for trouble among the more populated centers of interplanetary civilization, a regular jinx for a fellow who wanted to get along with the least effort possible. He led the way along the thicker clumps of vegetation, choosing the firmer directions for her faltering steps, and for long moments he heard nothing but their own heavy breathings and the sounds of their feet slogging. A whirl-ray came out of the mire, sending its tiny maelstrom careening away at a tangent and leaving a phosphorescent wake. He saw the girl shudder and avert her eyes. Lonny's own hand had slipped quickly inside his slicker to clutch the holster of a Z-type ray gun. "Back at home," she said thoughtfully, "the suckers all thought Uranus was something of a paradise, something like the South Seas, and I fell for that stuff." "Yeah," agreed Lonny grimly. And after you got here, you were too thick-headed to give up the thing as a bad job, too afraid to face your friends with failure, so you punish yourself with your own temper." "I suppose that's advice from one who knows," she retorted sarcastically, pausing to rub the cramped muscles of her leg, then going on as he looked back. "Don't think I'm crazy. If—" "Now what's the matter?" demanded Lonny irritably, pausing to see that she was stopped, and was clutching desperately at her throat, pulling at her collar. "Air! I can't get air!" she gasped. "How about you?" Almost instantly breathing was becoming difficult for Lonny. He peered around with dismay and saw that the mist was rising dangerously and that visibility was much stronger. Out of the distance came a faint, eerie whisper, as of distant winds dying. "Lana, it looks like we're in for it," he said grimly. "That's high pressure you feel. Pretty soon your ears will begin to ring, and if we don't hurry, we may never get back to boast about things here to our sappy friends at home." When the heavy pressure areas came over Uranus, mists rose to high in the air and dispersed slowly. Swift expansion of atmospheric gases caused a tremendous surface pressure that would last for some time. It meant a quick, crushing death under air compression if they didn't reach the mud-submarine. Lana Hilton was white with fright and trying hard not to show it. A strange metamorphosis was taking place in the heavens. Lancing colours of orange and red shot up like gigantic swords to flash across the sky. His ears began to throb dully. As the mist rose, Lonny saw that they had come too far to the left and that the mudship was 100 yards directly to their right. He saw something else, too. A man was running across the muddy surface, if his fast wobbling progress on mud shoes could have been described as a run. It could be only one person, Link Rayburn. A terrible fear seized him. If Rayburn reached the mudship and shut them out, they would die horribly. He began to hurry forward, slipped and fell awkwardly. Lana made a wry face and helped him to his feet. "The rat!" she gasped. "He heard you refer to my bag of pearls as a mere handful. It wouldn't do you any harm to think once in a while before speaking, big boy." Handful. Of course her small collection was a handful compared to his own rich pickings. So that was why she had come with him. The world was going around in a whirl now, but Lonny kept staggering onward. Link Rayburn had disappeared. The mud-submarine kept dancing tauntingly before his eyes and then disappearing. If it sank before he reached it, the work of long, endless months would slip from his grasp, and with it would go his life. Back on Earth they would never know, and Rayburn would live a life of affluence and ease. "We've got to make it, Lana," he gritted, though every breath was a torment that sent hot flames of pain shooting through every cell. She turned a game, tortured face to his, and nodded vehemently. A whole school of whirl-rays came rippling toward them, criss-crossing the mud with gleaming trails, and Lonny found his Z-ray weapon, sent the purplish beams of annihilation down into the centers of quivering, living whirlpools. Once he went around and around in narrowing circles toward the opened maw of a whirl-ray, only to see the lower shape dematerialize before the deadly emanation. They were at the very edge of the submarine, were clambering across the muddy landing, using their last reserve of strength. Link Rayburn was working at the catches of the hatch cover and had just succeeded in undoing the fastenings. Now he gave a tremendous heave, and the thing fell like a trapdoor. Hurled on by his wrath, Lonny made a dive for the traitorous visage, but as he dove, his foot slipped and he skidded sidewise. His head came down upon a railing brace with a sickening impact, and the gun went spinning. Through the darkening chaos of his mind, he felt the submarine starting to submerge. The mud was creeping up toward his body, was sucking at Lana's ankles, crawling in a tiny avalanche toward the dome of the hatch cover, now closed. They were beaten, whipped, done for. Now Rayburn could go back to Earth, concocting some wild tale as to their death. He would be laughing at them and enjoying every luxury. Lana was either dead game or so angry at Link's betrayal that she refused to give up. Though her face was distorted terribly from heavy pressure and agony, she pressed onward, was crumbling at last to her knees, and pointing wildly. Lonny saw what she meant. He could have shouted for joy, but breath would not come from his compressed lungs. The gun had fallen upon the lip of the hatch cowling, and now the cover was jammed. Through a narrow slit he saw Rayburn's eyes, narrowed and bestial, and his hands working like mad to free the mechanism. If he went down that way, it meant death for him too. Under heavy pressure the mud would send terrible pseudopods grasping through the slit. Lonny could have laughed, but there was no time for gloating. He saw the hatch door come up again, and then his foot had settled over the gun, and he was helping Lana down the stairway. "Tough luck, Link," he whispered huskily as weakness overcame him and he tumbled down the stairs. Dimly he became aware that the hatch lid was down securely now, and that the submarine was sinking rapidly. Lana Hilton clung to the upper ladderway for a moment, then released her hold from paralyzed fingers and fell like a rag doll, bouncing down the steps to come to rest across his own body. A trickle of blood came from her mouth, but she was grinning. That was all Lonny knew, for the darkness came up to swallow everything. 4. "Who hit him, boss? Boss hit him heap hard!" Baron Munchie, hardly able to lift the damp towel, was dragging it across his mouth, smothering him. Link Rayburn watched the operation interestedly, but not cautiously, from his position before the instrument panel. Lana Hilton was sitting up dazedly, rearranging her hair. "I knew it was too much to expect," she commented. "Couldn't leave us alone, could you, Link? I was just beginning to like the idea of getting away from you for good. Ooh, my head." "I hope your friend had the foresight to stock his larder well," said Link Rayburn with a shrug. "We may be cooped up here for some time." Lonny sat up, shaking his head dazedly. "I ought to whale the tar out of you," he cried angrily. "But I've got more sense than to do it at a time like this. Maybe I'll do it when the subboat comes up to the surface again. I never did have too much faith in you, Rayburn." Link Rayburn laughed. "You won't do it then, or ever, Lonny. There isn't an ounce of fight left in you. The planet's got you. I've always believed that you had enough pearls stacked away to make a fortune on Earth, but you kept putting the time for departure off into the future." His taunts acted as harsh irritants to Lonny Higgins, who doubled his fists and took a couple of steps forward. "Slap him down, boss," urged Baron Munchie, and Lonny stopped, his shoulders falling. "That's right," he said, grinning at the little elf. "Fight to the death, like all these insensate creatures of Uranus. No, I'll not do it. I'm saving myself against the day I'll get back to Earth." "You're a fool," said Link Rayburn. "Next time I'll get you for keeps." "At least you can save it until we get up from here," returned Lonny, brushing past the other and examining the instruments. "Depth indication, now 4,000 feet, and sinking slowly." With luck, they would be on the surface again in a few hours. Then it would either knock the tar out of Link Rayburn or kick him out in the mud. He felt a deep-seated, lethargic contempt for the mud-fisher. The dapper man was a despicable murderer at heart, and now he felt only a distant sort of loathing for him. Lana was different. In a way, she might have been a good sort. He had a hunch that Uranus was affecting her as much as it had him, bringing forth his irritable nature, sapping his energy, dulling his sensations in a sluggish, remote way. He had an idea that she would cut an amazingly attractive figure in one of the late translucent evening gowns back in one of the live spots of the populated planets. At the moment, she was highly intolerable and self-centered. He would do well to be rid of both of them. Baron Munchie was soaring up and down the room, catching midges when Lonny descended to the lower decks. The atomic motors, he found, were in good condition for an emergency. The trouble with them was that they provided merely a horizontal propulsion. The natural buoyancy of the vessel, coupled with the lessening of the surface pressure, would have to raise it from the murky depths. The lower deck was almost hemispherical in shape, and fully occupied with power apparatus. "They steal 'em, boss," warning Baron Munchie vindictively. "Now you fight, huh?" "Fighting wouldn't do any good," Lonny explained wearily. "People don't fight on Uranus. They're always fagged out, enervated." "Fagged," began the impish creature helplessly. "I mean that life is too boring to be taken seriously," went on Lonny. "Otherwise, I'd have knocked the slats out of that smirking backbiter long ago. I may have to do it yet." "You ought to fight 'em," declared Baron Munchie angrily. "They steal house, steal everything. Why no Earthmen fight, boss?" "Because Earthmen have to get mad to fight," returned Lonny. "And you can't get mad here somehow. Oh, shut up. I don't know how to explain it. Earthmen just don't feel violent emotions here on Uranus. They don't get mad at anything. They don't fall in love. They're just sapped dry of everything." His head was aching. It was a good thing his body had recovered from its exposure to the heavy pressure area. He climbed the rampway for the upper deck and stood motionless, breaking upon a surprising scene. All of the compartments had been searched, and he saw his cache of Uranusian pearls open to view. The wall safe hung ajar. Apparently the deft fingers of Link Rayburn had encountered no great difficulty in finding the combination. His eyes were glittering with fascination, and the girl, too, seemed unable to wrench her eyes from the inviting spectacle. "That's enough," gasped Link Rayburn, "to set a fellow up for life." "Yeah, and here we are," returned the girl hollowly, "stuck deep in the mud of Uranus." "Maybe you forget who they belong to," snorted Lonny, stalking into their midst and slamming his treasure back into its hiding place. "The indicator says we're at 6,541 feet. "Then we've stopped," said Rayburn. "It read the same 5 minutes ago." Lonny stood watching the gauges and found that the other was right. The mud-submarine had indeed come to a halt. It meant that some sort of an equilibrium was being established in the barometric storm center that raged above. "I'll start the motors and try jarring the ship around a little," he said, seating himself before the mechanisms. At a touch of his finger, dial bulbs lighted up, and from the lower depths came the whine of machinery. Almost instantly they felt a sidewise lurch, and then a slow climbing motion. "It looks good, anyway," said Link Rayburn. "We're going up again." "Thank heaven for small favours," breathed Lana thankfully, and watched attentively as Lonny began juggling the controls alarmedly. Link's eyes watched the indicator and began to show new amazement. "We're not ascending now," said Lonny grimly. "I don't know what's the matter. The motor drive is okay, but we're making a crazy circle, over and over, and not getting any higher." "You're nuts!" burst out Rayburn, stalking forward, waving his arms. Yet the yellow pallor of his face showed that he too had noticed the mudship's erratic behavior. "It's just not possible. Uranus is all mud, just plain fluid mud." "Or that's what we've thought up to now," said Lonny significantly. "What do you mean?" demanded Lana. You can't mean that we're trapped here with a fortune just in our grasp." The whine of the lower motors mounted, and as a result the mud-submarine began spinning around like a top. Yet the depth pointer had not moved. "It means that there's some sort of a skeletal core to Uranus after all," said Lonny with a vanquished sigh, snapping off the motors and pushing back from the controls. "And what's more, it means that we've bumped into it." "But how?" demanded Rayburn. "Even if there is a solid core, nothing would prevent our ship from floating up again." "Unless our vessel happened to get caught under a ledge," returned Lonny pointedly. "We sank while the pressure was heavy, and then, when it lessened, began to ascend. We climbed a short way and stopped. Then our horizontal screws sends the ship around in a short circle, indicating that we are in a shelving pocket. We can't descend unless the pressure storm gets violent again, and we can't climb through a shelving ledge of solid core, so our chances of getting out of here are rather slim." Rayburn's furtive eyes were glowing, like those of a beast at bay. He whirled around, struck out wildly at the controls, started the engines, and sent the mud-submarine spinning around again, but to no avail. Lana Hilton watched his every move, and she too was like a tigress at bay. Like animals, they glared around at the beryllium hulls, thinking of the millions of pounds per square inch waiting beyond, trying to press in upon them. An instant's exposure to that, and a human body would be but a pulpy mass. They felt helpless and insignificant. To the two who glared unbelievingly at the controls, the apparent unconcern of Lonny Higgins amounted to madness. He appeared not to be able to fully appreciate the true reasons for their violent perturbation. He was humming a tune through his teeth and searching among the tiny wall niches, from which he presently withdrew a tiny skillet. "No use getting excited," he told them. "The chances are that the pressure storms won't come around soon enough to do us any good. At any rate, there's nothing to stop us from eating while we're hungry. That is, while the food supply holds out." 5. "You're not human," said Link Rayburn accusingly, and he shook a quivering finger at Lonny. "Here we are in the face of death, and all you think of is your stomach." "There's not much choice," said Lonny Higgins, "when a fellow's empty, and the menu never changes here. Besides, eating might help you to think." "You shouldn't think while you're eating," reprimanded Lana. "It'll give you indigestion." "Great space!" broke out Rayburn. "You too! Who gives a hang about indigestion? Listen, you pair of fools. We're snagged down here on the bottom of a sea of mud. Pearls won't mean a thing to us in this fix. We'll be lucky if we ever get out of this with a whole skin." He began pacing up and down the room, swinging his hands, while Lonny inspected the storage compartment. "Looks like a fish dinner," he sighed. "Of course there are clams, of the mud-kelp variety, and Uranusian lobsters. They're really delicious at this time of the year. Then we got a very good variety of that piscatorial wonder known here as a whirl-ray, whose steaks are rather tasty. But in the last analysis, just fish." "I'll take the same," groaned Lana Hilton, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling with an attitude of unwilling acquiescence. "Between going nuts and getting the DTs, I'll take the nuts. Maybe I can forget a few trifles of life by just being in your company. At least it'll keep me from thinking of what a swell opportunity I had for being a good little girl. By the way, Lonny, do you think there's a hereafter here on Uranus?" "Why not?" asked Lonny with a grimace as he laid thick white slices of whirl-ray in the skillet and turned on an electric grid. "I suppose they'd picture there as some sort of a glorified place where mud just couldn't exist." "Yeah, probably with green fields, waterfalls, and mountains," returned Lana, leaning on her fist with a reminiscent sigh. "Gosh, Sometimes I wonder why I ever left those good things, and then again, what's the diff?" The fried steaks sent a not unpleasant aroma drifting through the control room. Lonny sat a tiny side plate on the table and pulled up a high slender chair like a baby's high chair, to which Baron Munchie soared. He tucked a napkin under his chin and sat waiting, with tiny knife and fork raised high. The sight was so amusing that somehow Lana found time to laugh. "You really coddle the little rascal, don't you?" she asked. "And for some reason I never really considered these man-like dragonflies with having any intelligence whatever." "Oh, they're smart in a way," agreed Lonny between bites. "You know, I've always had a theory that his race of beings came from one of the moons of Uranus. There are 4 of them, you know. I suspect he came from Umbriel." "Well, little man," said Lana, "maybe you're an Umbrielian. But where is your umbrella?" "Or an Arielite," suggested Lonny, "without a lantern." "Or a Titanian, or an Oberonian," said Lana. "Slap him down," sighed Baron Munchie in a flattered manner. "Give both barrels." "Say, let up with that kind of chatter, won't you?" groaned Link Rayburn, after trying again and again to get the mudship from beneath the deep ledge. "I'm going batty, I tell you, completely batty." "Probably it's the pressure," commented Lonny. "High blood pressure." With the table cleared, Lana's good spirits had taken another slump. She went gloomily with Rayburn to check the air, food, and water supplies of the strange craft. When they returned, Lonny Higgins was curled up on a couch, snoring lustily. "I don't get it," said Rayburn, throwing up his hands in despair. "He isn't like a man any more. He isn't like anything living. It's his ship, and he ought to know more about it than anyone. Oh well, if everybody else is going to give up the ghost, why should I worry?" "Sure," said Lana. "Why should we worry? Maybe his surmise wasn't true. Maybe it's something else holding us down. Maybe it's our imagination." She sat down, her mind in a daze. How long she sat there in a trance-like state she didn't know, but a movement from Lonny Higgins aroused her. Link Rayburn was stretched out on the floor, his mouth wide open, eyes closed with complete exhaustion and utter relaxation. "I think I've got an idea," said Lonny, stretching his arms and staggering to his feet. He looked at the controls and found that they were at the same depth, 6,541 feet. Their position had not altered a trifle. "We have been here over 8 hours. No barometric storm ever lasted that long on Uranus. The pressure must have been released on the upper surface by now, and we've got to have a heavy pressure area again somewhere. It just occurred to me that we might create that heavy pressure on the roof of this ledge that we're under, which would suffice just as well." "But how?" demanded Lana, and followed as he went to the beryllium hull at one end of the control room and pulled down a shutter. He had exposed a transparent plate of glassite, now black as ink with the outer mud, in whose centre a pair of binoculars had been frozen into the vitreous substance. "We'll use the field glass as a terminal," he explained, making disconnections at the control board and bringing 2 current wires in the direction of the wall. He affixed one wire to the binoculars and clamped the other against the rim of the port. "This glassite will act as an insulator, and we can force an electric current through the outer mud. There's a possibility that the current will react on the watery content to release hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis. I really don't think it will work, but it's a good way to occupy our minds." She watched as he made the terminals secure, then stepped up the amperage on the desk instruments. Very faintly, blue lightning flashes of electricity could be seen streaking through the outer mud against the glassite. For long moments they watched as nothing happened. Then he sighed disappointedly. "No use, I guess," he said reluctantly. "Too much outer pressure for gases to form." "You mean it's the end?" she asked in a tiny voice. Her hands reached out and caught him by the shoulders abruptly. For a moment the outer mask of her face had slipped, and her frightened soul stared through. When Lonny started to draw back, she held on. "Gosh, Lonny," she said hurriedly, "maybe I'm a little fool to break down like this. I think I may even be going to cry. But I've seen what you're really like these last few hours, under the stress of everything, I mean. You're really pretty decent and brave. You needn't deny that you've got courage and a lot of other admirable qualities. Your only trouble has been in letting the awful lethargy of Uranus get hold of you. That's all that's wrong, and what you need is something to jar you loose from this planet. Then you'd be a great guy. I really mean it, Lonny." Her eyes were shining like stars. She was on the verge of a complete breakdown. Yet Lonny Higgins was held as though in a spell, for her words had done something that had not happened in a long time, had broken through his apathy. Now, moving swiftly, she pressed her lips against his own, and they stood in a long silent embrace. Lonny's head was whirling, and he stumbled back, his hand crashing against a rheostat. A thunderous surge of high voltage crackled suddenly, kniving along the glassite, and the motors from the loaded decks sang a mounting thunderous song. At the same time, everything shifted. Something had dealt the mud-submarine a tremendous blow from above. They were sent careening against the hull and then to the floor, which began to tilt. Link Rayburn had been thrown to his hands and knees. Now his eyes goggled up at the instrument panel. Lonny Higgins sat sprawled out with a girl a tumbled heap in his arms. "Good going, Lonny!" cried Rayburn incredulously. "We're sinking again. How did you manage to do it?" Lonny blinked through a cascade of tumbling russet curls and looked up wonderingly. "I suppose the electrolysis worked after all," he answered weakly. "Under the pressure, the high voltage must have produced liquid oxygen and then ignited it. And if the propellers are working, we ought to be able to wriggle out into the clear some way." "That puts a different light on the entire matter," said Rayburn, getting to his feet and drawing a ray pistol from his pocket. "I told you I would do you in for good the next time I made a try. Get up, Lonny, and start saying your prayers." "My goodness!" gasped Baron Munchie, crawling up over the edge of the control chair and looking on with glittering, faceted eyes. 6. Lonny Higgins got up slowly, then glanced lazily toward the control instruments, where the depth indicator had dipped down noticeably. "That's all very well in due time," he said, "but we're still under the ledge, and not out of danger by any means. If we don't shove from under it, we'll land back in the same shape." "Get over to those controls, then," ordered Rayburn. Lonny grinned and went to the familiar seat. The craft was making larger circles as it descended, indicating that his guess must have been correct, that they were in a pocket, and that the pocket was broadening. Somewhere at the bottom of that pocket was a tunnel opening upon the outer ocean, and it was up to him to find that opening, blindfold. If they could only keep descending until the vessel entered the channel, their main problem would be solved. But if the pressure generated from the explosion was dissipated too suddenly, his mud ship would ascend into the trap and stay forever there on the muddy ocean floor. He felt a lurch. The ship had paused and was sinking no longer. This, then, was the limit. It would not go low enough. He saw the horror in Rayburn's eyes. They would die from starvation here. The gun in Rayburn's hands would be merciful if it relieved them from the more hideous death that was certain to come. The hull shuddered, slipped against a rocky outer substance that seemed to give way suddenly. He felt the relaxation of the outer barrier through the controls, knew that the propellers were driving it out and into the true bed of the Uranosian Ocean. The needle indicator paused uncertainly, started to rise. By the expression on Rayburn's face, he knew that the other had not guessed that their trap was behind them. It was his chance. Lonny's hands moved swiftly on the controls. A surge of power sent the rear-drive mud propellers spinning. Too much power. The ship tilted swiftly, and Rayburn lost his balance. The man at the controls left them in a flash. Lonny seized the wrist that held the gun, wrenched it away. It went skidding across the floor. Then he stuck out fiercely at the sardonic features so close to him. Rayburn rocked backward, flailing out with both hands, as Lonny came in again, both fists landing solidly. His antagonist spun backward, then fell helplessly to the decking. Baron Munchie was jumping up and down in ecstasy. "Hit him, boss! Sock him again!" he piped. But Lonny picked up the gun, slipped it into his pocket, and shook his head in the negative. "There's to be no more fighting, Rayburn," he said. "I'll pick you off with the gun if you start anything. When we break the surface, you can get your mud shoes and go." 4,000 feet. 3,000. The mud submarine was rising rapidly now, had passed the 2,000 mark. "You really hurt the little fellow's feelings," said Lana Hilton, evading his eyes and gesturing toward Baron Munchie, who was beating his fists against the wall in sheer frustration. "He must have been praying for blood and thunder." "I'll plaster him," Munchie was squeaking. "I'll do him in." 1,000. "He's a misfit here," said Lonny slowly. "He comes from Umbriel, or one of the other moons. On his own world he was used to great activity. Uranus hasn't affected him, acting upon his nerves, as it has the rest of us. But he's a misfit here. He expects the normal activity of his own satellite upon Uranus. That just isn't possible. I think he'd like it on Earth." "You mean?" began Lana, just as the mud submarine broke the surface and began bobbing to a rest. Lonny followed Rayburn up the hatchway, watched him open it. The upper mists broke in damply, sending heavy white furrows about their faces. Link Rayburn looked glum and defeated as he donned the heavy mud shoes and slogged away into the mist. Lonny Higgins closed the hatchway and yawned. He was beginning to feel dog-tired again, a normal sensation on Uranus, but a grim decision had taken shape in his mind. "Sure," he said, in answer to the question in her gleaming eyes. "I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to send an SOS. If that doesn't work, I'll get a straight call through to Earth, charter a space yacht, and have it sent to pick us up." "Lonny, you mean that?" began Lana, moving toward him with her lips invitingly close. But Lonny Higgins evaded her. He turned his back and sat down in a chair, then yawned again. Uranus had him. Old rocking chair had him. Something had him, as long as he was on this blasted planet. Lovely as Lana was, it would take more energy than he could assimilate to make love to her on this muddy world. "I guess you'll have to save it," he sighed regretfully. "But you'd not be safe to try those tactics again, once we get back on Earth." The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. From the pages of dusty old pulp magazines to your ear.